So this is a short talk about pitching, and specifically about pitching my cartoon strip, formerly Queen's Counsel, it's now King's Counsel, that runs in the Times, in the London Times, every Thursday, and has been there for 30 years. So now is the 30th anniversary of the strip. And the reason I'm recording this is because I was doing a pitch for our fourth year animation students at Escape Studios. And we were talking about pitching ideas, pitching concepts. And I thought rather than talk about pitching generally, I would actually talk about a specific pitch that was a success. And this is something that I pitched 30 years ago, back in 1993, to the Times, and it was a successful pitch. And it's still a successful pitch because it's still running in the newspaper, albeit with a different title 30 years later. So this is really about how that came about and about pitching in general and how you get projects off the ground and how you successfully pitch stuff. So consider this a successful case study of a successful pitch. So it actually started in 1992. I was working on a cartoon strip about politics. I was actually working for a politician at the time in the House of Commons in the Palace of Westminster, and a buddy of mine. We were making jokes about we were both research assistants, and so I started writing down the jokes that we came up with, and it got rejected. Here's my rejection letter from Private Eye. Lord Nome was their kind of fictional proprietor. Who said basically it's funny, it's not funny. This was when Punch still exists. So be not deterred, try Punch. So in other words, don't darken our doorstep again. But I did. I went back to Private Eye a year later, and based on the write what you know principle of life, which is a really good principle, I actually left animation for a while and became a barrister. This is a silly thing that was put in Peterborough in the Daily Telegraph. Picture of me wearing my barrister's gown. And so I thought, so what we did was, it was the same friend, Graham DeFries, and I, we thought, well, why don't we, because he became a lawyer as well, why don't we take these politicians, put wigs on them, and then make jokes about the law? And it was kind of very kind of zeitgeisty at the time. It was the era of the O.J. Simpson trial in America. It was also the era of lawyer jokes. You probably don't remember the lawyer jokes from the 90s because they were sort of hate jokes, really. They were stuff like, what you call 100 lawyers in a bus going off a cliff, and the answer is a good start, which isn't really funny. It's just a sort of nasty hate joke. But I had this idea that we could make jokes about lawyers that were kind of fun and affectionate and friendly, satirizing the profession, but not being horribly mean. Because I always think satire and humour works best when you're fond of your targets. So again, Private Eye said no. This is a note from Ian Hislop, who's still the editor today. Sorry not to take this, it came very close. So he said no, but then The Spectator, it was then edited by Dominic Lawson, said yes. Although we then, Graham and I went with the Times. It was like when we got the offer from The Spectator, the next day, the Times offered us a slot in the law pages, and that's of course exactly where you want to be. You want to be, the best pitches is when you've got a bit of a bidding war. If you've got two people or two organizations or two companies that want your work and are prepared to outbid each other, then you've got something good, and B, you can go with the highest bidder, which is what I did at the time. Hence this rather grumpy letter from Dominic Lawson from The Spectator. So it started in October 1993, and here was the first joke. And there were lots of jokes like this about fees. In the beginning, lots of the jokes were about fees, but they were also about my own experience as a barrister. And this was my own experience. I remember, I'd get sent off to court someplace, and occasionally there'd be too many cases listed, and the courts wouldn't be able to hear a case, and they'd stand it down or postpone it. And of course, I'd be delighted because I got my brief fee and I had the rest of the day off, but I'd have to explain with a sorrowful face to the client what had gone wrong. So this was a joke about that. And then I wrote jokes about what it's like being a junior barrister and the imbalance of power between you and the clerks, where back in the 90s they would call you sir, but you'd call them by their first name familiarly, but in reality, despite the formalities, they had all the power. And if you were rude to the clerks, or suggested that your brief fee was inadequate or anything like that, which I did on one occasion, and then found that the work dried up for a whole week or even two, you quickly figured out who was the boss. So it was all about writing my own stuff and writing what I knew personally. And that was the jokes in the beginning when they worked best. They came from personal experience. Then, of course, I left the bar. I went back to animation. So it became harder to come up with jokes that were based on personal experience. But I would get other people to help me write stuff and get people to contribute and try and come up with stuff that was, still felt true to life. So here are some of the main characters. It's always fun to create new characters. I have way too many characters in the cartoon strip. Most of them don't appear very often, but there are a few kind of dramatis personae who are in there all the time. In terms of getting the thing off the ground in the beginning, I think we actually sent it off to, as far as I remember, it went to Private Eye, The Spectator, and The Times. Those were the three publications I sent it into. So we were pretty lucky to get two of them biting. If I were doing this again, I'd probably be casting my net a lot wider. But then, the media landscape is completely different now. Back then, there really were, the newspapers were still what it was all about. Whereas nowadays, newspapers are much, much less powerful and much less influential than they used to be. So when you're pitching, you're really trying to target the thing you're selling, hopefully to the people who want it and who are looking to publish it. Now, I managed to get a bunch of books out of Queen's Counsel. Doing the books was fun because, all you really have to do is stick all the cartoons together and send it off. What I would actually do back in the day is I would create a dummy book, which I would literally make on my desktop at home, spiral, bind it down at the print shop, and send it off as a kind of finished product. So I'd send it to the publisher and say, this is what the book looks like. So that the idea being that they would have to do the least amount of work possible, because I wanted them to know that I was proactive, easy to work with, prepared to help them out, prepared to be nice to work with, easy to deal with, because nobody wants to work with a prima donna. And I would supply all the cover art. This was the joke for Lawyers Uncovered, that you looked at the back and there was Sir Geoffrey from the back, kind of silly gag. So it's only funny if you flip it over, but then it's kind of got a joke on the front as well. And then I did another book in 2009 when my then girlfriend Sarah, who's a lawyer, solicitor in London, she was talking about leaving the law at one point, as many lawyers do. And so we did this book together, actually, 101 Ways to Leave the Law, which was just sort of silly ideas, about chucking in your job. 40 Ways to Leave Your Lover, as a collection of jokes. And that this was the beginning of the joke was for Sarah, who really honestly doesn't want to leave the law. And she's still in the law today, so she clearly didn't want to leave after all. And then after the financial crisis, I did 101 Uses for a Useless Banker, which is similar kind of idea, similar jokes about bankers. And then in 2011, I did The Official Lawyer's Handbook. This was another pitch. And in this case, it was the successful pitch here, because you're always pitching, right? You've always got to go back and, you've got to persuade the publisher that this is going to make them money. That's really the crucial thing with any pitch. Is it going to make any money? And I actually went to find, there was a book published in the early 90s, I think about 91 or 92, called The Official Lawyer's Handbook. And it was written by Daniel White, an American author. And I managed to track him down actually in Los Angeles, where he lived and where I was not living at this time, but I was visiting. And I found Dan White and we had a drink together, and I persuaded him to let me essentially republish his book, updating it, because it was, 20 years had passed, updating it and adding my cartoons. So it became the Queen's Counsel Official Lawyer's Handbook. And this is still actually my famous book, because my favorite book, because it was very nicely produced by JR Books, or by the Robson Press. It's hardback. It's a very attractive book. It sold well. high production values, and it's got a lot of great content. It's actually a genuinely funny book, and I'm allowed to say that because most of it was Dan's work. 90% of it was Dan's work. Then I did another one, 2013. This was another pitch, a smaller publisher this time, Law Brief Publishing, who do mostly textbooks, but I managed to pitch to them this idea of doing a book that would be just for fun. They probably wouldn't make a lot of money off it because already, the internet was severely eating into the kind of market for these sort of books, which had traditionally really been for Christmas. People would give their niece or nephew who was going into the law a joke book about lawyers, something like that, kind of Christmas stocking filler type of stuff. But the internet has really changed that now. But I had a nice idea for the cover. Lawyers Omnibus. I sort of had a gag in my head about the lawyers on the bus, the sort of front and back cover again. And that was fun. That one did quite well. Although smaller publisher, less good production values on that one. And then I did another one in 2019, again with Law Brief Publishing, for a few guineas more. And I have not done a book since, although I would still like to do one, but the market for these things is really much diminished, and it is a trickier prospect these days in traditional publishing. Then in 2022, our beloved Queen passed away, and we had a king. And I remember my sister rang me up one evening and said, "Are you going to have to change the name of your cartoon strip?" And I thought, no, of course not. And then I immediately thought, well, yes, obviously, because all the Queen's councils around or in England suddenly became King's councils. So the name of the strip had to end as well. And so that was that was kind of the latest thing that happened. Nowadays, the strip is not in the newspaper in the Times every week. It's only in print every second week. But it is online every week. And nowadays, of course, there are comments online. So if the cartoon strip isn't funny, people will say so. So in a funny way, doing this kind of thing, you're pitching every week, because every week you've got to come up with a gag that is funny, that people connect with, that is topical, reflects something in the news, reflects something that the legal profession is thinking about, and yet isn't so abstract or obscure that only lawyers would understand it, because the jokes are always at that intersection between what is on lawyers' minds, but also what the public will appreciate. So that's the pitch of Queen's Counsel cartoon strip. I guess, in conclusion, I'd say you want to be pitching. Obviously, when you're pitching, you want to pitch to the right place, pitch to the right people. You've got to try and find the person whose desk it's going to land on. You want to make sure that you're nice to work with, that you have confidence in what you're doing, and that there's a market for it, that you've got a gut feeling that this is something that people will want. You want to be nice to work with, and you want to do as much work for them as you can. I think in the beginning, we sent in the strip I sent in at least a dozen ideas for the cartoon strip, because with cartoons, they want to know that you can keep doing it. Now, somebody asked me the other day in the classroom, would I be pitching this in 2023? And I said, absolutely not. No one is buying cartoon strips now. Traditional print media has been in serious decline for a long time. And I think I'm right in saying I'm the last cartoon strip left in the Times. All the others have been axed or killed off over the years. So that's a good reason to put a lot of effort into my weekly strip, try and make it funny. But also a reason why I'm not pitching more, because I'm just not really aware that anyone is buying these things. I think nowadays the business model has moved onto the internet, and I don't know how that works, really. I think it's much tougher. I guess Patreon would be one way of approaching that, but that's not something I know very much about. So that's the pitch for the cartoon strip formerly known as Queen's Counsel.